Congressman Brad Sherman is back with me, a senior member of the Jewish Members Caucus, along with Jeffrey Lord, Trump supporter, who was Reagan political director, and John Avlon, editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast. Congressman, let me just start with you. What was your reaction, your gut reaction, when you heard what Sean Spicer said this afternoon about Hitler?
It was simply outrageous. It was painful at this Passover season, and it worries me to think that Sean Spicer or anybody that high up in the administration would have such a lack of knowledge of the historical context. But I'm just as worried that Spicer made some other comments today that shows that he doesn't understand what's happening in the world to civilians in at least a dozen different locations where atrocities are happening right now. So he doesn't know the current context, and his comments about the historical context were painful and uncalled for.
So, I mean, John, here's the thing. I understand he's apologizing again and again and again, right? Okay, take him at his word for that. But saying what he said about Hitler isn't something you just say by accident with a slip of the tongue.
No. And he kept digging at the podium, which is what's so painful. Look, first of all, you don't make Hitler comparisons. It's always a surefire loser. You don't do it from the White House podium, and you don't do it during Passover. This is a triple major unforced error by the press secretary. I think it was a mistake that he apologized sincerely for. I know that Democrats are calling for his head, and certainly probably some of his enemies in the White House are trying to knife him over this as well. But this is a major unforced error that compounds ignorance with a lot of the negative narratives we've seen.
I mean, Jeffrey, it is stunning that somebody with any historical sense at all would say that he didn't use chemical weapons. I mean, he used gas chambers. I find the whole thing stunning. I mean, I'm saying take his apology at face value, but what he said, he said.
As somebody who's spent a lot of time reading history, I mean, even this Congregationalist boy knows that it's Passover, and that one would hope we could all agree that the use of chemical weapons in the Holocaust was just, I mean, evil incarnate, of which I can think of no greater one in the entire history of the world, and that's going some. I mean, there are competitors out there with Stalin and Mao, etc., but Hitler is a standalone. I agree with John, you know, just don't go there. And he stood up, he's apologized, and, you know, for heaven's sakes, let's move on. One other thing, though, this constant comparison in certain quarters of Donald Trump to Hitler is of the same thing. Donald Trump is not Hitler. The President of the United States is not Adolf Hitler. And they need to stop with that as well.
It's not particularly relevant to the conversation, but I completely agree with you.
Congressman, though Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi and your party has come out, her statement about Sean Spicer was Sean Spicer must be fired. I quote her, either he is speaking for the president or the president should have known better than to hire him. Do you agree with Nancy Pelosi?
Well, I think he showed himself to be out of his depth, and I said I was just as concerned about his comments that implied that anywhere in the world that there were atrocities occurring to children and babies, that there would be an administration response, because there are terrible atrocities going on right now. And as we think of the Holocaust, we've got to think about the victims in southern Sudan and East Congo, in Somalia and Yemen, and so many terrible things happening as we speak. And for Spicer, without a strategy, without a plan, without even knowing where these places are, to say that we're going to respond to tragedies like this, when he knows he should know that they have no plan to do that.
To your point, John, there are some within the administration who may have knives out for him. I'm not saying Nikki Haley is among them, but she did weigh in on it in her interview with Jamie on what Sean Spicer said about Adolf Hitler. Here she is.
It's unfortunate, and we should never have comparisons with Hitler, ever. That was a terrible time in history, and it's just not something people want to hear about or think that there's another comparison to it.
Clear and definitive.
Clear and definitive, and it appears there's one thing we can all agree on, which is Hitler comparisons are always a terrible, terrible, terrible idea when you don't expect it to come from the White House press secretary. I don't think that she was suggesting that Sean Spicer should be fired over it. But, you know, this seems to be a broad area of common ground, and at least we can agree on that.
All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate